Um, Regarding the offering, there will be an offering, but you will be asked to deposit your whatever you want to offer to us as you leave after this service. There'll be some bowls out on the table, and we graciously and very thankfully accept all of your contributions to this congregation. It's been an amazing week. A lot of improvising, amazing resources have been brought to bear. Fabulous questions have been asked. We've done our best to respond to those. Our board of trustees will be meeting this Tuesday night to talk about steps that we need to be taking as a congregation to support each other, to support those who rent our premises, both as occasional renters and also those who are here as long-term renters. So Diane, others of the board, I'm sure will have a very lively, interesting meeting. And we'll definitely do everything that we can to keep you informed of decisions that we take about measures going forward regarding meetings and events here in our congregation. I've been following as across the country, other Unitarian congregations have been improvising. A number of congregations are still meeting and are meeting this morning as we are. Others have decided to not cancel services, but to broadcast them at home. So we're all improvising as best we can. I think it's important that we do gather and support one another. I appreciate you showing up here. A special thanks to caretakers who've been here this week and who've been putting into practice special cleaning protocols. Igor was here on Friday. Paul Nash was here yesterday, much of the day. Edgar's been here this morning, cleaning and attending to our needs. So big thanks, as I'll be mentioning later, to Patty Turner, to Gordon Graham, to Diane Crosby for coming up with that excellent caretakers cleaning protocol. Thank you. How are we doing, Christian? We're live. So one more time, I'm going to say welcome to the Unitarian Church of Vancouver, to all of those who are in this room, and to individuals and families, to our students and scholars who may be tuning in to this, our Sunday worship service. We've heard prelude music from Elliot Dano, and we appreciate that music so much. He will be playing Cathedral Grove, not in the prelude, but during our offering. I'm not Cole Harris. Cole's not going to be speaking today. He's in fragile health, and I recommended that he stay home today and that I'd be speaking later on. Sakura, yes.
And also Love Soup today is also canceled.
Yeah, Love Soup has been canceled, and thank you for that announcement, Sakura. And we'll be figuring out what we're going to be doing later on. So please stay tuned, emails and announcements on websites about how we're going to continue to provide the service and the work that we do and must do as a congregation. I'd still like us all to take that special moment in this service where we turn to our neighbors and give them a warm but non-handshake greeting. So please do this inside this room, and those of you at home, turn to your loved ones and others and give them a warm welcome here this morning. So for those of you who are tuning in at home, we're doing that thing that we do on Sunday mornings. The people in this room are turning to one another and greeting each other. There are probably about 60 or 70 people here gathered. It reminds me of that one Christmas Eve long ago when there was a blizzard, and we didn't think, Elliot and I didn't think many people would be showing up because of that blizzard, but we decided to do the service anyway. And lo and behold, about this many people showed up for that Christmas Eve service that I'll never forget. We're going to light our chalice as we do near the beginning of our service, and I've asked Mary Beam, who's the secretary of our board of trustees, to come forward to do that. So Mary has lighted our chalice, and I'd like to say these words. Together we light this candle, together we see its light, with kindness and in deep bonds of community, with love for the human family in all its variety, with reverence before the world and its teeming web of life. May we care for our earthly home and each other with courage, love, and justice. And may it be so. So for those of you at home who may have a hymnal, why don't you pull it out? And for those in this room, let's do the same. Number 21, For the Beauty of the Earth. Let's rise as we're willing and able and sing it together. For the beauty of the earth, for the splendor of the skies, for the love rich from our birth, over and around us lies. Source of all to thee we raise, this our hymn of grateful praise. For the joy of being alive, for the heart and light, for the mystic harmony, we sense to sound and sea. Source of all to thee we raise, this our hymn of grateful praise. For the wonder of the hour, of the day in that great tree and flower, sun and moon and stars above. Source of all to thee we raise, this our hymn of grateful praise. For the joy of human care, sister brother, for the rich we all share, for all gentle thoughts and love, source of all to thee we raise, is our hymn of grateful praise. Thank you. And now I'm going to try to use this head mic because students and scholars, it's time for a story. And we're improvising on our state-of-the-art production values this morning as best we can. And I'm sorry I don't have a zip-up cardigan and tennis shoes to put on, but I'll do my best to share our story, which is called A Boy and a Jaguar, which I think is a lovely story for today. So I'll read it and then I'll read the page and then I'll show the pictures so that everyone at home can see the book that I'm reading. I'm standing in the great cat house at the Bronx Zoo. Why is this jaguar kept in a bare room, I wonder? I lean toward my favorite animal and I whisper to her, and my father asks, what are you doing? So there's a little boy at the Bronx Zoo talking to a jaguar. I try to explain, but my mouth freezes just as I knew it would, because I'm a stutterer. I try to push words out, but my head and body shake uncontrollably. Do you know someone who stutters? I've known people who stutter. Teachers at school put me in a special class. We're sorry, they say, but whenever he tries to speak, he disrupts others. The teachers think I have a problem. Am I? But I can do two things without stuttering. One, I can sing. I don't sing very well, but I can sing. And I can talk to animals. Every day I come home from class and I go straight to the closet in my room. I bring out my pets, a hamster, a gerbil, a green turtle, a chameleon, and a garter snake. I close the door and I talk to them, and I talk without stuttering. I tell them my dreams. I tell them I want to be able to speak like everyone else. And I know that my pets listen and understand. Animals can't get the words out, just as I can't get the words out. So people ignore and misunderstand them the same way people ignore and misunderstand me sometimes. Did you see that? I make a promise to my pets. I promise that if I ever find my voice, I will be their voice, and I keep them from harm. And I have to tell you one thing that's very special about this story. This is a true story, okay? My parents tried everything to help me to get over stuttering. Doctor after doctor, medicine, and even hypnosis, but nothing works. My father knows that one thing that does work. He takes me to the big cat house at the Bronx Zoo. I go straight to the cage with that lone jaguar. I lean over the railing. I put my face against the bars, and I whisper my promise to her, to the jaguar, and I do it fluently without stuttering at all. I get through school by learning tricks that stutterers learn. I learn when not to speak, when to avoid situations, and when to just not be around people. When I'm in college, my parents enroll me in a special program that helps stutterers. The teacher tells me that if I work hard, I can be completely fluent, even though I stutter. I think about how my mouth moves and air flows out. And for the first time in years, I learned to speak without stuttering. It takes lots of hard work, but it can happen. I can speak, but nothing really has changed inside. I still feel like I'm a problem and have a problem. Do you feel like that sometimes? I know I do. As I grow older, I go to the Great Smoky Mountains to study black bears. Alone in the forest with the animals, I feel that I'm at home. Later on, I go to Belize, which is a little country in Central America, just to the side of Mexico. I'm the first person to study jaguars, and the jungle makes me feel more alive than I have ever felt. Have any of you ever been to a jungle? Do they make you feel alive? I learned how to follow and capture jaguars for study before releasing them back into the wild, and I'm really happy. But as fast as I can catch jaguars and gather information to help them, hunters are hunting them down. They're afraid of the animals, and they prize their bodies for trophies. I decided I need to get more areas protected for the jaguars. I want to keep the promise I made to the pets in my closet. And I have a voice now, and I must speak for the animals. See that? Hunters and the man working in the jungle. So guess what he does? He goes to the capital of the country of Belize, to the office of the Prime Minister. I'm given 15 minutes to make my case. Just 15 minutes. And there he is speaking to the president of that country. I can't stutter or distract from my message. I have to convince one of the poorest countries in Central America with no protected areas in the entire country that it has to save jaguars. And do you know what happened? Later that day, the Prime Minister, the President, they all vote to create the first preserve for jaguars anywhere in the world. Back in the jungle, I know that all jaguars in the study area from their tracks, but one day I come across a completely new track, the biggest I have ever seen. I follow the prints around in the jungle for hours, not wanting to be caught in the jungle at night without a flashlight. I turn around to go back to camp. But there, right behind me, was the biggest jaguar I had ever seen. It had been following me all along. Have you ever had a jaguar follow you? I had a mountain lion follow me once, and it was New Year's Eve up in the mountains in the snow. Very exciting. I know I should feel frightened, but instead I squat down and I look into the jaguar's eyes, just as I had with that sad old jaguar in the Bronx Zoo. But this animal in the jungle isn't sad. In this animal's eyes are strength and power and sureness of purpose. We are both at home. We are both calm and happy, the jaguar and me. And I lean toward the jaguar just a little, the way I had at the Bronx Zoo so many years before. You see that? He's leaning towards that jaguar. Do you think he's afraid? I'd be afraid. But he whispers very quietly to that jaguar. Guess what he says? Let's see if I can find the page. He says, "Thank you. Thank you." And that's the story. Even though we may have a stutter, or maybe sometimes when we feel like we have a problem or bad feelings inside, I think that there are things that we can do for one another. It may be for our pets, maybe for our brothers and sisters, or moms, dads, other people at school, to make them feel calm and happy and loved. And especially at this time, I hope that that's what we're feeling, and that's what we're doing at home and school and elsewhere. And that's the story. Thank you. Leslie Hill from our board has a few things to say now.
Thank you. I'm almost undone by the story of the jaguar. But presumably he lived long enough to write the book, so Welcome to the Unitarian Church of Vancouver. We acknowledge that we are meeting on unceded traditional Musqueam land. My name is Leslie, and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees, and I wish to extend a particularly special welcome to those of you who came today, and to visitors, and to anyone who's been away for a while. Welcome back. We have no greeters today. I think we have no coffee across the way in Hewitt Center. We do have orders of service. I hope you managed to pick them up on your way in. It would be good to check. There's lots of information in here, and usually a lot goes on around the place. It's quite a good thing to check, I think, if you're planning on doing anything here this week, and make sure it is still happening. And for anyone sitting along this side, please be careful of the absolutely lethal wire that is coiling and curling around people's feet. We don't need deaths by electrocution here in the church. Announcements today from Sakura. In good and bad times, it is always therapeutic to be here. Thank you. And from Jeannie Corsi and from her daughter. Some very sad news. Alistair Mont died last week in Victoria. We will miss Alistair very much, his energy and his love for fine conversation and friends. We send love to his family and will remember him always. It doesn't say. So a reminder again, there are many ways for each of us to make a difference in the congregation. To help it thrive, we bring our hearts, minds, skills, and wisdom and energy. Financial contributions in whatever amounts are another way of showing our commitment. The Unitarian Church of Vancouver, which is all of us, accepts your in-kind and monetary gifts, large and small. A portion of this collection each Sunday goes to our Outreach Opportunities Fund, which supports social justice and environmental organizations. From February to May, the fund will be collecting for the Aboriginal Mothers Center. The AMC's many services include counseling, education, training, spiritual and social support, and purpose-built accommodation for at-risk mothers and their children. The AMC also organizes homelessness outreach and family wellness programs and operates a licensed daycare and community kitchen. So please leave your collections, large and small, in the offering on the way out at the end of the service. Thank you.
Watch the feet behind the path, turn to straight down roads. Feel a trickle in your clothes, pull the dust from your nose. Hear the tractor's dead roll. Oh, you can't stop now. There's a quarter section more than school. And it figures that the rain keeps its own smooth time. You can watch it flood for miles, but I guess you've got a while. So ease the throttle and every ball's a game, and there's victory in every one. Poor old Kuzik down the road, the heartache hail and hollers brought him down. He gave it up and went to town, and then appears the other day, took a heart attack and died at 42. You could see it coming on, 'cause he worked as hard as you. In an hour, maybe more, you'll be wet clear through. The air's cooler now, feel that I'm proud. Turn to straight dark roads. Put another season's promise around. And if the harvest any good, the money just might cover all the lords. You worked all that you owe. Buy the kids a winter coat. Take their wife tags for Christmas if you can. All summer she hangs on when you're so tied to the for the good times come, but at least it's rain, so it won't be dark when September rolls around. So aren't you feeling like cloud? Turn to straight dark roads. But another season's promise around.
Thank you, Elliot. Are we all feeling comfortable sitting in our places, both here and at home? Well, you know, in our worship services, we take a few minutes to sit quietly, thoughtfully, in prayer and meditation. And maybe we can do that at home as well. And I have some words I want to share, a poem written by Reverend Lynn Unger. The poem's called Pandemic, and it was written on March 11th, 2020. And it goes like this. What if you thought of it as the Jews consider the Sabbath, the most sacred of time? Cease from travel, cease from buying and selling. Give up just for now on trying to make the world different than it is. Sing, pray, touch only those to whom you commit your life. Center down. And when your body has become still, reach out with your heart. Know that we are connected in ways that are terrifying and beautiful. You can hardly deny it now. Know that our lives are in one another's hands. Surely that is becoming clear. You don't have to reach out your hands. Reach out your heart. Reach out your words. Reach out all the tendrils of compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. Promise this world your love, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, so long as we shall live. Please join me now in a few minutes of silent meditation, thought, and prayer. You can open your eyes now. You're there at home. Do you feel quieter now inside? Promise this world our love, your love, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, so long as we all shall live. Thank you, Elliot, for that lovely music. William Golding's allegorical novel, Lord of the Flies, was published in the year of my birth, 65 years ago. In that story, a group of schoolboys survive a plane crash and are left stranded without adult supervision on a remote, uninhabited island. Most of us know what happens next. Within a brief span of time, this band of uniformed, civilized kids descend into tribalism, hysteria, and murder. Golding speculates that if a disaster occurs, then just about everything we know and value about civilization goes down the tubes. What happens in the wake of non-fictional and its harbor explosion back in 1917? We would think looters ran amok in the ruins and plundered the dead. A book on that event, written in 1962, asserted that almost immediately after the explosion, elements of civilized society were broken down, and for many, all that remained was the jungle law of self-preservation. Sounds very much like the Lord of the Flies scenario, doesn't it? And it coincides with media reports of mayhem, looting, and murder in New Orleans after the devastation of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. From Great Britain, Timothy Garton Ash waxed philosophical, quote, "Katrina's big lesson is the crust of civilization on which we tread is always wafer thin. One tremor and you've fallen through, scratching and gouging for your life like a wild dog. Remove the elementary staples of organized, civilized life, food, shelter, drinkable water, minimal personal security, and we go back within hours to a state of nature, a war of all against all." And just this past week, New York Times columnist David Brooks, citing historical cases of human responses to plagues, warned ominously, quote, "Pandemics kill compassion too." To be sure, people can panic, hoard, and shut down, and that's what our 24-hour news cycle transfixes on, and thus stokes our anxieties, our fears about each other, and the so-called thin crust of civilization giving away. Thankfully, on closer inspection, in fact, dire accounts and armchair philosophizing are almost always wrong. Back in Halifax in 1917, the chief of police reported 3 days after the explosion that he had heard of only one case of attempted burglary. Laura MacDonald, a Halifax resident, wrote that her city, quote, "with its normally rigid class structure, divided by religion, class, and country, briefly and blessedly integrated. English Protestant mothers who 2 days before would not have stepped foot in the Richmond neighborhood suddenly welcomed poor Irish Catholic children into their homes. Whole families were invited to live in the parlors of wealthier citizens, and," she wrote, "teenagers and young adults proved particularly useful. They took instruction and worked for hours on end without sleep." Untold scores of medical teams, and I'm still talking about Halifax. We know about that big explosion. It was like the biggest explosion that had ever taken place on Earth before the atomic bombs went off and the city was devastated. Untold scores of medical teams, hundreds of skilled laborers and volunteers stepped forward and worked round the clock to address the emergency needs of the injured, orphaned, and homeless. Immediately after the blast, Joe Gloob abandoned the work of boarding up his stationery store and joined volunteers to open up grocery warehouses without permission in order to distribute their contents to a desperately needy city. Halifax's St. Paul Anglican Church became a refuge for 350 homeless families and served over 10,000 meals in the first month after the blast, one of many churches that became emergency shelters. These kinds of acts, sacrifices, improvisations, calling for new roles, new alliances, new rules, are typical of disasters. One local authority, surveying the spontaneous response by residents all over the ravaged city, spoke to the effect that, sad as was that day, it may be the greatest day in our city's history. Good Samaritans or ghoulish thieves? Lord of the Flies or ad hoc citizens' emergency salvation armies? Which one is it to be? When disaster strikes in the form of a hurricane or a munitions explosion or a global pandemic like what we're facing now, is it the case, assumed or predicted by so many, that we must be reduced to a so-called state of nature, Or will we cooperate instead? Rather than resorting to fight or flight in extremity, do we, perhaps to our own astonishment, tend and befriend? And if so, does this have anything to say about us, about human nature? 10 years ago, in a remarkable book, Rebecca Solnit set out to explore these questions by focusing her attention on a distinct class of events that we can imagine or that we expect should result in chaos and selfishness. What she has discovered, from the 9/11 attacks to earthquakes in Nicaragua and Mexico City, from the Halifax disaster to post-Katrina New Orleans, is that these events, though terrible, tragic, and grievous, also give rise to remarkable temporary communities, paradises of a sort in the rubble, where people, acting on their own and without direction from the authorities, manage to provide for each other. In the wake of an earthquake, she writes, a bombing, or a major storm, most people are altruistic, urgently engaged in caring for themselves and those around them, strangers and neighbors, as well as friends and loved ones. The societies that take shape in these days and weeks after events like this are like a utopia, she writes, for many people, where concrete acts for the public good trump the slovenly rhetoric and expectations that just assume that when ordinary people are left to their own devices, we will revert to each against all behavior and selfish private self-interest. Public good, a kind of temporary utopia. I saw this 40 years ago in the wake of blizzards that temporarily shut down Providence, Rhode Island, and access to everyday amenities. Hotels opened up their doors to house the homeless. Neighbors shoveled each other's sidewalks and looked in to see if shut-ins were doing okay. People strapped on cross-country skis with backpacks full of food and traversed the city bringing food to people who were shut in. For a few brief, blessed weeks, we became more aware of each other and of the power of nature. And we felt, and boy, do I remember this vividly, we felt a kind of lightness and joy. In April 1906, the city of San Francisco had an earthquake that devastated it. Those who survived, however, as in Halifax, fought the fires, protected each other, and set up remarkably resilient, sturdy societies in parks, churches, and vacant lots. First-hand accounts reveal, quote, that people were, for the most part, calm and cheerful, and many survived the quake with gratitude and generosity. Rebecca Solnit recounts one story after another of ordinary people who set up soup kitchens that served hundreds daily, of 500 union plumbers in San Francisco who volunteered without pay and worked around the clock for over a week, repairing broken pipes and stopping the waste of water in unburned districts, of groceries and slaughterhouses that gave away every bit of their stock to anyone who asked. She also writes about the widespread spontaneous behavior of New Yorkers, not always known for kindness and patience, and of the people around the world during and immediately after the 9/11 attacks, and the accounts are heartbreaking and beautiful to read. All of this reminded me of the words of the evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould, who, witnessing acts of human solidarity, called it the great asymmetry. The great asymmetry. That is, for every incident of evil or disaster, we must, he said, remember and bring forward 10,000 acts of kindness to bear witness. Acts too quiet, too decent and ordinary to be reckoned in the annals of peoples and empires, and that often certainly don't make it on the headlines of our media. The ecologist Craig Packer, writing in September 2001, said, "There's a grandness in the human species." And the anthropologist James Moore marveled, quote, "to see all those people risking their lives, climbing over the rubble on the chance of finding one person alive. Well, you wouldn't find baboons doing that." Horrors notwithstanding, the overall picture to come out about human nature, he said, is wonderful. Solnit calls these temporary solidarities disaster communities. Remarkable societies whose appearance over and again suggests that just as many machines reset themselves to their original settings after a power outage, so human beings can reset themselves to something altruistic, communitarian, resourceful, and imaginative in the wake of disasters, that we revert to something we already know how to be. The possibility of paradise is already written within us as a default setting. This isn't woolly, touchy-feely, wishful thinking. These are some of the conclusions that arise from a whole field of research called disaster studies that started up during the Cold War and that were pioneered at the University of Chicago. Based on methodological investigation of dozens of disasters, this work started first with a description of conventional beliefs and assumptions by political, media, military, and academic elites about how ordinary people were supposed to behave in extreme situations. Mass panic, wild stampedes, loss of concern for their fellows, hysteria, and exploitative behavior. And that's followed by a widespread sense of stunned helplessness, which renders victims completely dependent on outside aid for guidance and organization. It's a dispiriting, disempowering portrait, a view that social scientists who study disasters have utterly refuted based on decades now of research and hundreds of case studies. What these studies and Rebecca Solnit's timely book reveal about us, I find provocatively redemptive and encouraging in times like the ones we're going through now. First, it begins with a radical premise. Everyday life is already a disaster of sorts, one from which actual disasters can liberate us. We suffer from recurrent stress and anxieties. Don't we say this all the time? I'm stressed. We suffer from recurrent stress and anxieties in everyday life. We die daily, though in ordinary times we do it privately and separately. And here, all too often, modern societies fail to fulfill basic human needs for community identity and personal meaning. The second finding goes like this. The widespread sharing of danger, loss, and deprivation produce an intimate, primary group solidarity among the survivors, which overcomes social isolation, provides a channel for intimate communication and expression, and provides a major source of physical and emotional support and reassurance. In these settings, the outsider becomes an insider. the marginal central. People are thus able to perceive with a clarity never before a set of underlying basic values to which people subscribe. They realize that collective action is necessary for these values to be maintained. And through this action and the values they disclose, people feel a sense of belonging and unity rarely achieved under normal circumstances. That is to say, disasters may be a kind of hell, but what arises, what we rediscover in us, are deep wells of benevolence, sympathy, and solidarity waiting to be tapped and channeled into service. Provided with temporary liberation from the web of old griefs, habits, assumptions, and fears in which we're normally caught, these events and the altruism they evoke tell us that we may just be better than we think we are. I've seen this at work between and behind the headlines these past weeks, and close to home here. Federal, provincial, and city health officials have been calmly, clearly going about their work, taking prudent steps and giving sensible, non-panic-stricken and invoking advice. This past week, as I mentioned earlier, Patty Turner, Gordon Graham, and Diane Crosby met here and drew up a COVID-19 extra cleaning precautions checklist for our caretakers to review, enforce, and report. I didn't ask them to do that. They just showed up and did it. Dozens of emails and phone calls have been flying, as you can imagine, this past week between staff, members of the board, and congregants, assessing precautionary steps we needed to take in order to support our congregation and those who rent and use our buildings. All of this and more underline the basic findings of social scientists and thoughtful observers that I've highlighted in these remarks. Don't assume for a moment, however, that I'm not aware of our dark side. I've studied and been oppressed by it all my life. And yet, we must never forget the great asymmetry that is the deepest truth about the human family. For every incident of evil or disaster, there are and always have been 10,000 acts of decent, ordinary, saving, meaning-bestowing kindness and solidarity expressed by women, men, and children every day. Remembering, reclaiming, and living out this truth as our birthright, experiencing the sense of purpose and closeness that it can bring, and doing it without caving in to undue panic and anxiety may well be the great contemporary task of being human. May we take this up as a spiritual practice. Look evil in the eye, know in our bones that it is there, and then let us respond defiantly with grace and generosity to strengthen and bless the deep ties, the connectedness we all have, from loved ones to the congregation of the faithful and to all beings everywhere. And may it be so. Amen. And now let's turn to our closing hymn, number 163, For the Earth Forever Turning. And as we're willing and able, let's rise and sing it together. And in closing, by way of benediction, taking up those words of Reverend Lynn Unger, promise this world our love, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, so long as we all shall live. And may it be so. And now, without holding hands, let us connect and sing Carry the Flame.
Sure.